In section 7.7, we are going to be looking at equations involving inverse, trigonometric functions. And our directions are going to be this. Solve each equation for x, where x is restricted on the given interval. These are actually pretty easy, so let's get started. I have 4 for us. First one says y is equal to 1/4 sine of x, and our interval is going to be between negative pi over 2 and pi over 2. Now the interval doesn't have any kind of say in what our answer is, so let's just ignore the interval for now. And the whole idea is we want to get x by itself. So let's get rid of the 1/4. We could divide both sides by 1/4. 1 divided by 1/4 is 4. And now if we want to get x by itself, we have to take the inverse sine of both sides. Taking the inverse sine gets rid of sine. They're inverses. Just like square rooting is the inverse of squaring, adding is the inverse of subtracting, inverse sine is the inverse of sine. So we just get our answer, x is equal to the inverse sine of 4y. That's all there is to it. I mean, this is like a pretty easy section. Let's move on to our second problem. Our second problem is y is equal to 3 times the cotangent of 5x. And although it doesn't matter for us when we're solving, the interval is technically between 0 and pi over 5. We want to get the x by itself, so let's divide both sides by 3. We get 1/3 y is equal to the cotangent of 5x. Let's get rid of cotangent by taking the inverse cotangent of both sides. That would cancel out with cotangent, and you would just get 5x is equal to the inverse cotangent of 1/3 y. And then we could divide both sides by 5 or multiply by 1/5. And you would get 1/5 times the inverse cotangent of 1/3 y. I'll show you the work here. And that would be our answer. Our third problem says, how about if y was equal to 4 plus 3 times the cosine of x? And our interval is between 0 and pi. We want to get x by itself, so let's start off by subtracting 4 on both sides. We get 3 times the cosine of x is equal to y minus 4. We have to get rid of the 3, so we'll divide both sides by 3. And we'll get the cosine of x is equal to y minus 4 over 3. And to get the x by itself, to get rid of cosine, let's take the inverse cosine of both sides. Cancel out with cosine, we get our final answer, which is just the inverse cosine of y minus 4 over 3. Our last problem in this section says that y is equal to the tangent of 2x minus 1, and the interval is going to be 1/2 minus pi over 4 to 1/2 plus pi over 4. If we want to get x by itself, we could start off by taking the inverse tangent of both sides. Cancel out the tangents. We get the inverse tangent of y is equal to 2x minus 1. Remember, we want to get x by itself, so let's add 1 to both sides. And we get the inverse tangent of y plus 1 is equal to 2x. We're almost done. Let's divide both sides by 2. And we get that x is equal to the inverse tangent of y plus 1 all over 2. Or another way to think about this is we could just divide each term by 2 or multiply by 1/2. So we could also write 1/2 times the inverse tangent of y plus 1/2. Both of these are exactly the same answer. And I actually even have a third way in my notes. I'm sure you recognize that these are all the same, but we could also just write x is equal to 1/2 times, just factor out the 1/2 so maybe it looks a little bit prettier. They're all the same. All right, I hope this makes sense. Please stay tuned for our next section.